The hallway smelled like floor wax and old textbooks, a scent that seemed to stick to everything in this school. For Maya, it was just the smell of another long day. She kept her head down as she moved through the crowded corridor, clutching her worn-out backpack straps tight against her shoulders. It was a defense mechanism. If you don't make eye contact, you don't get noticed. And for Maya, going unnoticed was the main goal. She was a junior in high school, but to most of the student body, she might as well have been a ghost. Life hadn't been easy for her. She lived in a foster home on the rough side of town, a place where there was never enough quiet time and never enough money. While other kids were talking about the latest sneakers or weekend trips to the mall, Maya was worrying about if the electricity would stay on or if she would have to share her winter coat with one of the younger kids in the house. Because of this, she didn't have the trendy clothes that everyone else wore. Her jeans were often a little faded, and her sweaters were always a little too big. Bought from the thrift store down the street because they were warm and cheap, she walked into her third period class, which was the only time of day she actually enjoyed. It was Mr. Henderson's music class. He was an older man with kind eyes and a patience that seemed endless. The classroom was a bit of a mess. Stacks of sheet music piled in corners and instruments stored in cases that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. But to Maya, it felt safe. The smell of dust and wood varnish was better than the smell of the hallway. Here, she could sit in the back and just listen. The class was noisy that morning. Everyone was talking about the upcoming winter showcase. It was a big deal at their school. Usually it was just the popular kids, the ones who could afford private singing lessons or who owned expensive guitars, who signed up. They would strut around on stage, showing off, while the rest of the school clapped politely. Maya usually ignored it. It wasn't for people like her. She loved to sing, but she only did it when she was alone, usually late at night, in her room with the door closed. Or when she was walking home to block out the noise of the traffic. Singing was her secret. The one thing that belonged only to her. Mr. Henderson clapped his hands together, trying to get the room's attention. "Okay, everyone, settle down," he said, his voice a little raspy. "I know you're all excited about the showcase, but we need to talk about the sign-up sheet." He held up a clipboard with a piece of white paper attached to it. "I need acts. I need people who want to share their gift. Don't be shy." The room went quiet for a second, and then a laugh rang out from the front row. It was Taylor. Taylor was everything Maya wasn't. She was rich, loud, and confident. She wore designer jackets and had perfect hair. "Mr. Henderson," Taylor said, flipping her hair over her shoulder, "who is actually going to sign up? Unless we have some famous pop stars hiding in this room, it's going to be boring." Her friends giggled along with her. They always did. Taylor had a way of making people feel small without even trying hard. She looked around the room with a smirk, daring anyone to challenge her. Maya sank lower in her chair, pulling her hoodie up over her head. She felt that familiar knot tighten in her stomach. It was the feeling of not belonging. Mr. Henderson sighed, looking tired. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the faces. "You know, talent isn't about being famous," he said softly. "It's about heart. It's about having something to say. I know there are people in this room who have beautiful voices. I hear you humming sometimes when you think no one is listening." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She froze. Had he heard her? Sometimes when the class was working on theory or watching a documentary, she would hum quietly to herself. She thought she was being quiet enough that no one could hear. She felt her face get hot. She prayed he wouldn't look in her direction. "I'm going to put this clipboard on the piano," Mr. Henderson said, walking to the front of the room and placing it down. "If you want to perform, write your name down. We need acts. We need the show to go on." He stepped back and wiped his hands on his pants. "Think about it." The bell rang a few minutes later, signaling the end of class. The students grabbed their bags and rushed out the door, eager to get to lunch or their next break. Maya took her time. She always waited until the room was empty to leave. It was easier to navigate the halls when the crowds had thinned out. She slowly put her notebook away, watching Mr. Henderson organize some papers on his desk. She looked at the piano. The clipboard was sitting there, the white paper shining under the fluorescent lights. It looked so innocent, just a blank sheet of paper waiting for names. But to Maya, it looked like a trap. If she wrote her name down, Taylor would see it. The whole school would see it. They would laugh. They would say, "Look at her, she thinks she can sing." The thought made her hands shake, but then another thought popped into her head. It was a quiet voice, barely a whisper. Asterisk, you have a voice. It deserves to be heard. Asterisk, Maya stood up. She slung her bag over her shoulder. She told herself she was just going to walk out the door. She told herself she wasn't going to look at the paper. But her feet seemed to move on their own. She walked toward the piano. She stopped in front of it. The paper was blank. Nobody had signed up yet. They were all too scared, or too cool, to be the first one. She looked at the door to make sure no one was watching. The hallway was empty. Mr. Henderson had stepped out into the hallway to speak to another teacher. It was just her and the clipboard. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a short pencil with a worn-down eraser. Her hand was trembling so much that the pencil almost slipped from her fingers. Why was she doing this? It was a bad idea. It was a terrible idea. But she remembered the nights she spent singing to the younger kids at the foster home to get them to sleep. She remembered how music made her feel like she could fly away from her problems for a little while. She wanted to feel that on stage, just once, even if it was terrifying. She leaned over the paper. She didn't write her name in big, bold letters. She wrote it small, in the corner, hoping it wouldn't be too obvious. Maya. Just 5 letters. As soon as the pencil left the paper, she felt a rush of panic. What had she done? She quickly turned and hurried toward the door. Just as she reached the hallway, Taylor walked back in. She had forgotten her phone on her desk. Taylor stopped when she saw Maya. She looked at Maya, then at the clipboard on the piano, then back at Maya. A sly smile spread across Taylor's face. "Did you forget something, Charity Case?" Taylor asked, her voice sweet but mean. "No," Maya mumbled, looking at her shoes. She pushed past Taylor and walked into the crowded hallway, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't look back. She didn't see Taylor walk over to the piano and pick up the clipboard. Mr. Henderson walked back into the classroom a moment later. He found Taylor standing there, reading the paper. "Did you forget something, Taylor?" he asked kindly. Taylor looked up, a fake look of surprise on her face. "No, sir. I was just looking. Is someone actually signing up? This is going to be a disaster." She pointed a manicured finger at the bottom of the page. "Maya, seriously? The girl who wears the same hoodie every week?" She let out a loud, sharp laugh. "This is going to be the funniest show ever. I can't wait to see her try to talk into a microphone, let alone sing." Mr. Henderson's face hardened. He walked over and took the clipboard from her hand. "That is enough, Taylor," he said firmly. "Maya has more talent in her little finger than you have arrogance. I suggest you remember that." Taylor rolled her eyes, unbothered by the scolding. "Whatever you say, Mr. H, but don't say I didn't warn you." She grabbed her phone from her desk and sauntered out of the room, already typing a message to her friends, likely spreading the news to make Maya the laughingstock. Of the school before the day was over, Mr. Henderson looked down at the paper. He saw the small, neat handwriting in the corner. He smiled. It was a sad smile, but a proud one too. He knew what was coming. He knew the other kids would make fun of her. It was high school, and that was what happened when you were different. But he also knew what he had heard in the hallway when Maya thought no one was listening. He knew the power she held inside her. He tucked the clipboard under his arm, and looked out the door where Maya had disappeared. "Good luck, Maya," he whispered to the empty room. "You're going to need it." The bell rang for the next period, and the noise of the school swelled up again. But the secret was out. The quiet girl had signed up, and in just a few days, the entire school would find out that the person they ignored the most was the one with the loudest voice. Maya walked down the hall, unaware that her life was about to change completely, terrified that she had made a mistake, but deep down, feeling a tiny spark of hope ignite in her chest for the first time in a long time. The days after Maya signed her name on that sheet of paper felt like walking through a minefield. Every time she walked into the cafeteria, the noise seemed to drop a decibel. just for a second, before rising up again like a wave. She could feel eyes on her back. Word traveled fast in high school, especially when there was a chance to make fun of someone. By Wednesday, everyone knew. The quiet girl in the oversized hoodie had actually signed up for the talent show. Taylor, of course, had made sure of that. She hadn't kept it a secret. She had told her friends who told their friends who told everyone else. It wasn't just gossip. It was sport. Maya would walk past groups of girls and hear them giggle. She would hear whispers like, "Can you believe it?" And this is going to be a train wreck. Even in Mr. Henderson's class, the vibe had changed. The usual safe haven felt brittle. Maya sat in her usual spot in the back, but she couldn't focus on the music theory on the board. She was too busy listening to the snickers coming from the front row. Mr. Henderson tried his best to ignore it, but Maya saw the way his jaw tightened every time someone made a noise. He was protective of his students, especially the ones who didn't fit in. But there was only so much a teacher could do against a tidal wave of teenage cruelty. He kept giving Maya these reassuring nods, but they didn't help much. Maya just wanted the day of the rehearsal to be over. She thought that if she could just get through the practice, maybe she would be brave enough to quit before the actual show. Finally, the afternoon of the dress rehearsal arrived. The school auditorium was a large, cavernous room that smelled of old velvet and dusty curtains. It was usually a place where bored students sat for assemblies, but today it was buzzing with nervous energy. The stage was set up with bright lights that made the dust motes dance in the air. There were cables running all over the floor like black snakes. Maya stood in the wings, the area just off stage to the left. She felt small. She was wearing her best dress, which wasn't saying much. It was a simple, dark blue dress she had found at a thrift store 2 years ago. It was clean, which was the most she could ask for, but it was clearly old. The hem was starting to fray a little at the bottom. She smoothed it down with her sweating hands, wishing she could disappear into the heavy red curtains behind her. On the other side of the stage, a group of boys was tuning their electric guitars. They had expensive amps and shiny instruments. On the stage right now, a girl was performing a dance routine with a professional-looking Bluetooth speaker. It felt like everyone else had resources, had support, had talent that was approved by the world. Maya just had a voice she was afraid to use. "Okay, next up." Mr. Henderson's voice boomed over the speaker system. He was sitting at the soundboard in the middle of the auditorium, adjusting sliders and knobs. "Maya, you're up." A hush fell over the group of students sitting in the front few rows. Most of them were just waiting for their turn, but Taylor and her group were there too. They had saved seats right in the center, the best spot to watch and critique. Maya took a deep breath that felt more like a gasp. Her legs felt heavy, like they were made of lead. She forced herself to move, to walk out of the shadows and into the harsh white light of the stage. As soon as she stepped into the light, she felt exposed. It was blinding. She couldn't see the audience clearly because of the glare, but she could feel them. She could feel their judgment. She walked to the center of the stage, her worn sneakers squeaking softly on the wooden floor. She looked around for a microphone stand, usually for these rehearsals. They set up the nice microphones on the sleek, modern stands. But today, the stage was messy. The previous act must have moved things around. The only microphone left standing in the center was the one that nobody ever used. It was ancient. It was a heavy old-fashioned microphone on a rusted metal stand. The paint was chipping off the stand, revealing the dull metal underneath. The mesh head of the mic had a dent in the side, looking like someone had dropped it years ago. The cord was thick, black, and wrapped in duct tape near the base because the rubber coating had worn away. It looked like it belonged in a trash pile, not on a stage. Maya stopped in front of it. She looked at Mr. Henderson in the booth, then back at the ugly microphone. She reached out to adjust the height. The stand squeaked loudly, a high-pitched metal whine that echoed through the silent auditorium. From the front row, a loud, sharp laugh cut through the air like a knife. It was Taylor. "It's no way." Taylor shouted, her voice projecting easily in the large room. "Is she seriously using the junk mic? That thing is older than my grandmother." Her group of friends exploded into laughter. It wasn't a quiet giggle this time. It was full-on, raucous laughter. Other students turned to look, some of them smirking. others looking uncomfortable. "It fits her outfit, though," one of Taylor's friends added loudly. "Vintage trash." The laughter got louder. Maya froze. Her hands were gripping the cold metal of the stand, her knuckles turning white. She felt a hot flush of humiliation rise from her neck to her cheeks. It was exactly what she had been afraid of. She looked ridiculous standing there in her old dress next to a broken microphone while the rich kids laughed at her. The urge to run was overwhelming. She wanted to drop the mic, turn around, and sprint out the back door of the auditorium. She wanted to go home and never come back to this school. She looked toward the soundboard. Mr. Henderson was standing up, his face red. He looked furious. He leaned into the talkback microphone, his voice booming through the speakers. "That is enough. Taylor, knock it off, or you're out of the show right now." The laughter died down instantly, though Taylor still had a smirk plastered on her face. She crossed her arms and sank lower into her seat. Looking unbothered by the threat, Mr. Henderson looked at Maya, his face softening. He spoke into the mic again, but his voice was gentle now. "It's okay, Maya. Ignore them. That mic actually has a great sound. It's a classic. Just give it a try." Maya looked at him. She could see the encouragement in his eyes. He was rooting for her. But the damage was done. The laughter had shattered her confidence. The microphone in front of her felt like a weapon they had used against her. She stared at the dented mesh head. It looked like a beaten-up thing, much like she felt in that moment. She thought about walking away. It would be so easy. Just one step back, and she would be in the shadows again. She could tell Mr. Henderson she changed her mind. She could tell him she was sick. But then, a strange thought crossed her mind. She looked at the rust on the stand. This microphone was old. It was discarded. It was laughed at by people who didn't know any better. It was just an object sitting in the corner waiting for someone to give it a purpose. Just like her, Maya took a shaky breath. She wasn't doing this for Taylor. She wasn't doing this for the kids in the front row who thought they were better than her. She was doing it because she was tired of being quiet. She was tired of being the girl who got laughed at. If she walked away now, they would be right. They would say she was a joke. But if she sang, even if she wasn't perfect, at least she would be speaking up. She tightened her grip on the stand. She pulled the microphone down slightly to match her height. The squeak of metal echoed again, but this time no one laughed. The auditorium was dead silent, waiting to see what she would do. Maya closed her eyes. She blocked out the lights. She blocked out the dusty smell of the curtains. She blocked out the sight of Taylor sitting in the front row with a smug look on her face. She imagined she was back in her room. She imagined the cool air of the night coming through the window. She remembered the feeling of loneliness that she usually felt, and she grabbed onto it. She decided to use it. She turned that feeling of being invisible, that feeling of being looked down on, into fuel. She stood up straighter. She didn't look like a scared girl anymore. She looked like someone who had made a decision. The old microphone sat there waiting. Maya took one more deep breath, filling her lungs all the way to the bottom. She opened her mouth, not to speak, but to let out everything she had been holding inside for years. The air was still. The moment was stretched tight like a rubber band, and then she began. The silence that filled the auditorium was heavy and thick. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that happens right before something breaks. Everyone was waiting. Some were waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to run off the stage crying. Taylor and her friends were leaning forward in their seats, their faces twisted in smug smiles. Ready to whisper another insult the moment Maya made a mistake, Mr. Henderson stood motionless at the soundboard, his hands hovering over the dials, ready to cut the microphone if the bullying got any worse. But Maya didn't run. She stood there in her faded blue dress, clutching the rusted stand like it was the only thing holding her up. The microphone in front of her was scratched and ugly, a piece of junk that had been thrown in the corner years ago. Yet, as she looked at it, she didn't see a piece of metal anymore. She saw a lifeline. She closed her eyes again, tighter this time, shutting out the harsh white lights that made her feel like she was under a microscope in the darkness of her own mind. The auditorium disappeared. The sneers of the popular girls faded away. The smell of old dust and the squeak of shoes vanished. Maya went back to the place where she felt safe. She imagined the small, cramped bedroom in the foster home. She pictured the cracked window where she used to sit and watch the stars late at night. That was where she sang. That was where she poured out all the things she couldn't say to anyone. She sang about the nights she went to bed hungry. She sang about the anger she felt when she saw other kids getting picked up by parents who loved them. She sang about the loneliness that felt like a heavy stone in her chest. She had never told anyone about those feelings, but she had sung them 1,000 times. Her grip on the microphone loosened slightly. Her trembling hands stopped shaking. She took a deep breath, a breath so deep it seemed to pull air from the very back of the room, and then she opened her mouth. The first note didn't come out as a shout or a scream. It slid out, low and steady, like a slow river moving through a valley. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Because the microphone was an old vintage model, didn't make her voice sound crisp and modern like the pop songs on the radio. Instead, it gave her voice a texture. It made the sound warm, rich, and slightly raspy, like an old vinyl record playing. It was a sound that demanded attention without asking for it. Taylor, who had been mid-whispered to her friend, stopped talking. Her mouth hung open slightly, the words dying on her lips. The smile that had been plastered on her face faltered. She looked up at the stage, expecting to hear a screech or a weak, trembling voice. But what she heard stopped her cold. Maya didn't open her eyes. She kept them closed, letting the music flow through her. She started singing a song that was slow and sad, a song about finding strength in the dark. Her voice wrapped around the lyrics, twisting them into something new and painful. She hit a note that made the dusty curtains seem to shimmer. It wasn't just that she was on key, it was that she meant it. Every word she sang felt true. In the back of the auditorium, few students who were just there to skip class looked up from their phones. They stopped scrolling through social media. They looked toward the stage. Who was that? The voice didn't match the girl they ignored in the hallways. It was too big, too powerful. It belonged to someone else, someone strong. Mr. Henderson at the soundboard felt a chill run down his arms. He had heard many students sing over the years. Some were good, some were bad, and most were just average. But this was different. This was the kind of voice that doesn't come from practice alone. It comes from living. It comes from having something you need to get out. He slowly moved his hands away from the dials. He didn't need to adjust anything. The old microphone, which he had considered throwing away last year, was capturing the exact sound he couldn't have created with a computer. It was perfect. On stage, Maya began to sway slightly. The fear was draining out of her, replaced by a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. When she sang, she wasn't the poor girl in the thrift store dress. She wasn't the foster kid who didn't belong. She was just a voice. She was a storyteller. She felt the vibrations of the music in her chest, and for the first time, she wasn't trying to hide. She was letting herself be seen, even if her eyes were closed. She moved into the chorus. Her voice rose in volume, filling the huge room. It soared up to the high ceiling, bouncing off the walls. The sound was so clear that it seemed to cut through the tension in the air like a knife. The acoustics of the old auditorium caught the sound and threw it back, making it sound even larger. It was a sound that demanded respect. The students in the front row, the ones who usually made the most noise, were completely silent now. The boy who had been tuning his guitar stopped and listened. The dancers stopped fixing their hair. Even Taylor, the girl who lived for attention, couldn't look away. She looked at the girl standing on the stage in the oversized clothes, clutching the rusted mic. And she didn't see a joke anymore. She saw a person. She saw someone who was hurting, and someone who was incredibly strong. Maya still hadn't opened her eyes. She was too afraid that if she did, the spell would break. She was afraid that if she saw the looks on their faces, she would forget the words. So she kept her eyes shut, blocking out the world, focusing only on the melody and the emotion. She remembered the feeling of the cold wind on her face when she walked home alone. She remembered the feeling of being invisible in the cafeteria. She poured all that loneliness into the high notes, turning the pain into something beautiful. It was a transformation. The things that made her weak were now making her strong. The song built to a climax. Maya's voice became powerful, trembling slightly with emotion but not breaking. It was a cry, a shout, a declaration of existence. The old microphone hummed with the force of it, handling the power perfectly. As if it had been waiting all these years just for this moment, Mr. Henderson closed his eyes for a moment, just listening. He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, but he wiped them away quickly. He opened them again, watching Maya. He saw the way she stood. Her back was straight now. Her shoulders were back. She wasn't hunching over, trying to hide. She was standing tall, owning the stage. It was a physical change, visible to everyone watching. This was why he taught music. This was why he loved the arts. It wasn't about being famous. It was about moments like this, where a person discovered who they really were. As the song began to slow down, the volume of Maya's voice dropped, becoming soft and intimate again. She held the last note, letting it hang in the air for a long time. It was a pure, clear sound that seemed to suspend time. No one moved. No one breathed. The entire auditorium was captured by that single, vibrating sound. The dust motes dancing in the light seemed to stop too, and then Maya did something she hadn't planned. She opened her eyes. She blinked a few times, adjusting to the bright lights. For a second, she looked dazed, as if she was waking up from a long dream. Then her vision cleared. She looked out into the darkness of the auditorium. She couldn't see faces clearly because of the spotlights, but she could see shapes. She could see the outlines of the students in the front row. She saw Taylor. She saw the way they were sitting. They weren't laughing. They weren't whispering. They were staring. The realization hit Maya all at once. She had done it. She had sung in front of them. And for the last 3 minutes, they hadn't laughed. The silence that greeted her now wasn't a silence of mockery or waiting for a joke. It was a silence of shock. It was the silence of people who had just witnessed something they didn't expect. Maya let go of the microphone stand. Her hands were sweating again, but now it was from the heat of the lights, not just fear. She stood there, feeling her heart pound in her chest. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The silence stretched on, second after second. It felt like an hour, though it was only a few moments. She looked toward the back of the room, squinting against the lights. She thought about running off the stage. The adrenaline was starting to fade, and the panic was trying to creep back in. Asterisk, what do I do now? She thought. Asterisk, do I bow? Do I say thank you? She had never performed on a stage before. She didn't know the rules. But as she stood there, looking at the dark room, she felt a shift in the atmosphere. It was subtle, like the wind changing direction, but she felt it. The judgment was gone. The bullying had evaporated, melted away by the heat of her voice. She wasn't the invisible girl anymore. She was the girl with the voice that stopped the room. She took a deep, shaky breath and prepared to face whatever came next, whether it was applause or just the return of the real world. But for that moment, standing in the light with the old mic in front of her, she felt like she could fly. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't the same silence that had filled the room before. When Maya first walked onto the stage, the silence had been heavy with judgment, waiting for her to mess up. It had been a cold, sharp silence that felt like a knife against her skin. But this silence was different. It was warm. It was thick with awe. It felt like the whole room was holding its breath, afraid that if they let it out, the magic spell would break. Maya stood there, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it thumping in her ears. A fast rhythm that drowned out the buzzing of the overhead lights. She kept her hands resting lightly on the cold metal of the microphone stand, afraid that if she let go, her knees might buckle. She blinked a few times, her eyes adjusting to the bright glare. She looked out into the darkness, but she couldn't see faces clearly. She just saw rows of shapes, shadows where her classmates sat. For a terrifying second, panic spiked in her stomach again. Asterisk, what if they hated it? She thought. Asterisk, what if they are just staying quiet because they feel sorry for me? Asterisk, she instinctively took a small step backward, ready to flee. Her body wanted to run back to the safety of the wings, to hide behind the heavy red curtains and disappear. But before she could move, a sound broke the stillness. It was the sound of a single pair of hands, clapping, clap, clap, clap. It was slow and rhythmic. Maya froze and looked toward the sound. It was coming from the back of the auditorium. It was Mr. Henderson. He was standing by the soundboard, clapping with a steady beat. A huge smile spread across his face. He wasn't just clapping to be polite. He was clapping with pride. Then another sound joined in. A boy in the third row, the one who had been tuning his guitar earlier, started clapping too. Then the girl who had been practicing her dance routine. Within seconds, the clapping began to spread. It started like a small rain shower, tapping against a roof, and then it grew. It turned into a thunder. It wasn't just polite applause anymore. It was a roar. The noise swelled up until it filled the entire auditorium. It bounced off the walls and shook the dust from the ceiling. It was a wave of sound so loud that Maya felt it vibrating in her chest. People weren't just sitting in their seats anymore. Students were standing up. First one, then 10, then 50. The entire room was on its feet. Maya stood frozen on the stage, her mouth slightly open. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She looked toward the front row, expecting Taylor and her friends to be laughing or booing, but they weren't. Taylor was sitting in her seat, her face pale. She wasn't clapping, but she wasn't laughing either. She was staring up at Maya with a look that Maya had never seen on her face before. It was a look of shock. For the first time, Taylor looked small. Maya noticed that Taylor's friends weren't looking at Taylor for cues on what to do anymore. They were looking at Maya. They were clapping. Even the girls who usually made fun of her clothes were standing and cheering. The realization hit Maya like a warm wave. They weren't laughing. They were cheering for her. The invisible girl was seen. A tear rolled down Maya's cheek, hot and fast. She quickly wiped it away with the sleeve of her faded dress. She felt dizzy, not from sickness, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. She looked at Mr. Henderson. He was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, laughing and clapping at the same time. He gave her a thumbs up. Maya felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It was a strange feeling, like a muscle she hadn't used in years was waking up. She smiled, and it was a real smile, not the fake one she used to hide her pain. She didn't know what to do. She had never practiced bowing. She had never imagined this moment. So she just did what felt natural. She nodded her head, a small, shy nod of thanks. She took her hands off the microphone stand, but before she turned to leave, she looked out at the crowd one last time. She looked right at Taylor, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She didn't lower her eyes. She held Taylor's gaze for a split second. She didn't look angry. She just looked confident. Then, she turned and walked off the stage. As soon as she stepped into the wings, the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright started to fade. Her legs felt like jelly. She leaned against the heavy curtain, taking deep, gasping breaths. She was trembling so hard that she had to hold on to the fabric of the curtain to keep from falling over. "You did it," a voice whispered. Maya looked up to see Mr. Henderson standing there. He had rushed from the soundboard to meet her the moment she stepped off stage. He didn't ask her if she was okay. He didn't tell her she was talented, even though she was. He just wrapped his arms around her and gave her a tight hug. It was a fatherly hug, the kind she hadn't had in a long time. I told them," he whispered into her hair. "I told them you had a gift." Maya buried her face in his jacket, inhaling the smell of coffee and old paper that always clung to him. She started to cry, not out of sadness, but out of relief. It was the release of years of holding everything in. "I was so scared," she choked out. "I know," Mr. Henderson said, rubbing her back. "But you were braver than anyone else out there. You used that old mic, and you made it sing, Maya. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in this auditorium." They stood there for a moment while the applause outside finally started to die down. Students were filing out of the auditorium, buzzing with excitement. Maya could hear snippets of conversations as they passed the curtains. "Who was that? I didn't know she could sing like that. That was insane. Seriously, she gave me chills." Hearing these words felt surreal. It was like she was listening to a story about someone else. But then, a group of girls walked by. Taylor was with them. They were walking slowly, and they were very quiet. Usually, Taylor would be loud, dictating where they were going for lunch. But today, Taylor was silent. She was looking at her phone, but she wasn't typing. She just looked down. Maya peeked through the curtain and watched them go. She saw Taylor look back at the stage once, a confused expression on her face. Then Taylor hurried away, as if she couldn't get out of there fast enough. Maya pulled back from the hug and wiped her eyes. She looked at Mr. Henderson. "Do you think they will remember me tomorrow?" she asked. Her voice was small again, the bravery of the stage fading into the reality of the hallways. Mr. Henderson looked her in the eyes, his expression serious. "Maya, they won't just remember you. They will never forget you. You changed the atmosphere in that room. You can't undo that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, handing it to her. "Now, you go home and get some rest. You have a real show to do in a few days, and I expect you to be ready." Maya nodded. She took the handkerchief and dried her face. She felt lighter, as if someone had taken a heavy backpack off her shoulders. She walked out of the auditorium and into the hallway. The school day was over and the hallways were mostly empty. The sun was streaming through the windows, casting long golden shadows on the floor as she walked to her locker to get her bag. She realized she wasn't walking with her head down. She was walking upright. She was looking at the school around her. It looked different. It didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked like a place where she had just won a battle. She reached her locker and spun the combination. The locker door creaked open. Inside, stuck to the door with a magnet, was a small, cracked mirror. Maya looked at her reflection. Her eyes were red from crying, and her hair was a little messy from the humidity of the lights. But she didn't look away. She looked at herself and smiled. The girl in the mirror looked strong. She looked like someone who had a voice. She grabbed her backpack and swung it over her shoulder. She walked out of the school and into the cool afternoon air. The streets were busy with traffic, and people were rushing home from work. Maya joined the flow of the sidewalk, but she felt like she was walking to a different rhythm now. She passed a group of students from her school who were standing outside the corner store. They were the same kids who usually ignored her. One of them, a boy with a basketball under his arm, looked up as she walked by. "Hey," he said. It wasn't a sneer. It was just a greeting. "Hey," Maya said back. Her voice didn't shake. "You were good in there," he said, kicking at the sidewalk. "Really good." Maya felt a surge of warmth in her chest. "Thanks," she said simply. She kept walking. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew that tomorrow might be hard. She knew that Taylor might still be mean, or that things might not magically become perfect overnight. High school wasn't a fairy tale where everything fixes itself in one day. But today, she had sung. Today, she had been heard. And that was something that no one could ever take away from her. The old microphone was still sitting on the stage. The applause had faded away, but the feeling remained. Maya took a deep breath of the evening air and began the walk home. She didn't feel invisible anymore. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And as she walked, she started to hum a soft melody. A new song she was just starting to hear in her head, a song that belonged only to her. The night of the winter showcase finally arrived. The school auditorium had been transformed completely. Usually, it smelled like floor wax and boredom, but tonight it smelled like popcorn, excitement, and the sharp scent of hairspray. Parents, teachers, and students filled every seat. The chatter was loud, a buzzing noise that bounced off the decorated walls. There were fairy lights strung up along the balconies, and a large banner draped across the stage that said, "Winter Talent Show 2023. Backstage, however, it was a different world. It was chaos. Students were running around in costumes, frantically fixing their hair, checking their instruments in the dim light of the dressing rooms. There was nervous energy everywhere. Some kids were pacing back and forth, muttering their lines to themselves. Others were laughing too loud, trying to hide their fear. Maya sat on a wooden crate in the corner, away from the madness. She had her headphones on, but she wasn't listening to music. She just wanted to block out the noise. She was wearing the same blue dress from the rehearsal, but she had fixed it up as best she could. She had sewn a small white ribbon around the waist that she found in an old sewing kit. It wasn't much, but it made her feel like the dress was special. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them together tight. She felt sick to her stomach. The rehearsal had gone well, but that was just students. This was the real thing. There were hundreds of people out there. Her stomach did a flip every time she thought about walking out there. Mr. Henderson walked by carrying a clipboard. He looked stressed, but when he saw Maya, he stopped. His face softened. He knelt down so he was eye level with her. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. Maya pulled her headphones down to her neck. "I think I'm going to throw up," she whispered honestly. Mr. Henderson smiled. "That just means you care. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried. But listen to me, Maya. Look around." It gestured to the chaotic room. "Everyone out there is scared. Even Taylor. Even the football players who are doing a skit. They are all scared. But you have something they don't have. You have a voice that matters. You have nothing to prove to anyone. You just need to go out there and sing like you did the other day. Can you do that?" Maya looked at him. She saw the belief in his eyes. It gave her a small bit of courage, like a battery charging up. "I can try," she said. "Don't just try," Mr. Henderson said, tapping her knee lightly. "You just do." The show started. The curtains opened, and the principal came out to say a few welcoming words. Then the acts began. There was a band that played a rock song but forgot half the chords. There was a group of cheerleaders who did a dance routine that was very impressive. Then it was Taylor's turn. Taylor walked onto the stage. She was wearing a sparkling silver dress that looked like it cost more than Maya's foster home made in a month. She looked beautiful and confident. She had a backing track set up, and she sang a pop song. She had a decent voice, and she danced perfectly. The audience clapped politely. Her friends in the front row screamed and cheered. When she finished, she took a dramatic bow, looking very pleased with herself. As Taylor walked off stage, she passed Maya. She didn't say anything. She didn't smirk. She just looked at Maya with a strange, quiet expression, like she was seeing something she couldn't understand, and then hurried to her dressing room. And now, the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "For our final act of the evening, please welcome Maya." The clapping was scattered at first. People didn't know who she was. They whispered to their neighbors, asking if they had missed a name on the program. Maya took a deep breath. She stood up. Her legs felt like they were made of wood, but she forced them to move. She walked to the side of the stage. A stagehand gave her a nod. The heavy red curtains began to part. As Maya stepped into the light, the whispering stopped. The bright spotlights hit her face, blinding her. For a second, she couldn't see anything but white light. She felt the heat of the bulbs on her skin. She walked to the center of the stage. There it was. The old rusted microphone stand earlier that day. Mr. Henderson had suggested using a newer, shiny stand for the show. He had said, "Let's make it look professional." But Maya had asked him to keep the old one. She told him it felt right. It felt like her. So, he had set it up there in the center, the ugly duckling of the stage, surrounded by expensive equipment. Maya grabbed the microphone. The cold metal felt familiar. It felt like a friend. She closed her eyes for a moment, just like she had at the rehearsal. She blocked out the hundreds of faces. She forgot about the parents in the back, the teachers, the judges. She forgot about Taylor in the wings. She opened her mouth and began to sing. This time her voice was even stronger. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was because she wasn't holding anything back. She sang a song about hope and rising up. Her voice filled the huge auditorium. It was clear, it was powerful. It was filled with so much emotion that it made the air feel heavy. In the audience, people stopped talking. The mother who had been checking her phone put it away. The father who was bored sat up straight. The silence spread from the front row to the back row like a ripple in a pond. They weren't just listening to a student. They were witnessing a moment of pure art. Mr. Henderson was standing at the side of the stage. He watched Maya. He saw the way she stood, tall and proud. He remembered the scared girl who hid in the back of his classroom. He felt a lump form in his throat, and his eyes began to water. He didn't wipe the tears away this time. He let them fall. He felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just as a teacher, but as a human being watching someone find their wings. Taylor stood in the wings, watching from the other side. She watched Maya sing. She looked at the audience, who were completely captivated. Taylor looked down at her expensive dress and then back at Maya. For the first time, Taylor realized that clothes and popularity didn't make you important. What made you important was what was inside you. She watched Maya pour her heart out, and she felt a deep pang of jealousy, but also a strange sense of respect. She would never admit it, but she knew she had been beaten. Not by a better dress or more money, but by real, raw talent. As Maya reached the end of the song, her voice soared to the highest note. She held it, her voice ringing out crystal clear, vibrating against the walls. It was a note that seemed to hang in the air forever. Then she brought the song down to a soft, gentle close, singing the last line almost like a whisper. I am here. She let go of the microphone. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Silence so deep, you could hear the air conditioning humming. Maya stood there, her chest heaving, waiting. Then the explosion happened. It wasn't just clapping. It was a roar. The entire audience stood up at once. The sound was deafening. People were cheering, whistling, and shouting. A group of students in the front row started chanting her name. Maya, Maya, Maya. Maya looked out, blinking in the lights. She saw people standing. She saw smiles. She saw tears on the faces of people she didn't even know. She looked over at Mr. Henderson. He was clapping so hard his hands were red, and tears were streaming down his face. He was beaming at her, nodding his head. She looked down at the old mic, patting it gently. Then she did a small, awkward curtsy. It wasn't a perfect bow, but it was perfect for her. Maya turned and walked off the stage. As soon as she was out of the lights, her legs finally gave out, and she sank to the floor, putting her head in her hands. She was shaking all over. She felt hands grabbing her, pulling her up into a hug. It was Mr. Henderson. He didn't say anything. He just held her while she cried tears of relief and joy. You did it, Maya. You did it, he whispered over and over. When she finally pulled away, she saw that Taylor was standing there. Taylor looked uncomfortable. She was twisting a bracelet around her wrist. She looked at Maya, her eyes a bit red. You were good, Taylor said quietly. It wasn't a mean comment. It was the closest thing to an apology Maya would ever get from her. Thank you, Maya, said simply. She didn't gloat. She didn't say anything mean back. She didn't need to. She just smiled a tired, genuine smile. The night ended with the judges giving out awards. There was an award for Best Costume, which Taylor won, and she clapped politely but without her usual excitement. There was an award for Best Instrumental. Then, the principal came to the microphone for the final award. And the award for the most outstanding performance goes to Maya. The crowd went wild again. Maya walked back onto the stage. She didn't have the old mic with her this time. She just held the certificate they gave her. She looked out at the sea of people. She saw her foster parents in the back row, looking confused, but clapping loudly because they had heard she was good. She leaned into the microphone to say a few words, just like Mr. Henderson had told her to do. She looked out at the crowd. Thank you, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I wanted to quit before I came up here. I thought because I didn't have the right clothes or the right stuff that I didn't belong. But Mr. Henderson told me that talent comes from the heart, and I think he was right. So thank you for listening to me. She walked off the stage, and that was it. The next day at school, things were different. Maya walked down the hallway, and people actually moved out of her way to say hi. They wanted to sit with her at lunch. They wanted to hear about her singing. She wasn't tea.